Hi, I'm going to talk about confusing art today. Abstraction, minimalism, confusing art can be a lot of things. So these are things that over the years I've had the most questions with. So this one always comes up. This is Marcel Duchamp, Fountain, 1917. Yes, it's signed R. Mutt. That is a pseudonym. It's a fake name. We think it might refer to Mott Plumbing or Mutt and Jeff. Puns were something that were very, very big for with the Dadas. In particular, kind of sexualized puns, innuendos. Those were things that delighted them, kind of gave them a giggles like junior high boys. But Marcel Duchamp is certainly one of the main components of the Dadas. His friend Man Ray, who was a famous photographer. And so the idea of Duchamp's work was basically it's art because I say it's art, and it's called a ready-made. The term associated with this work is a ready-made. And again, it leaves a lot of freedom for the artist. So it's been discussed as one of the most influential artworks of all time. Okay, and let me move on. Man Ray, Le Violin d'Ingres. Again, sometimes it's pronounced Ingres, sometimes it's pronounced Ang, but it is a classical or more traditional or more academic artist. And Le Violin of Ingres was 1924, and this is kind of a manipulated photograph. So this is well before Photoshop, so it was very innovative. This is the model is Nikki Montparnasse, and they were very well known for being these socialites almost. People never knew what they were going to be dressed as, what her makeup was going to look like, and they kind of waited for them to arrive at a party and see what were they going to be doing. So this is Man Ray and Nikki Montparnasse. And this was, of course, a kind of a stage name that she adapted. And but here, this is woman as an instrument, woman's body as an instrument. Now, keep in mind, this is 1920, 1924. 1920s, women were still definitely objectified. Are they objectified today? Well, yeah, probably, but probably not nearly so much as they were in this time. So this idea of Le Violin d'Ingres basically is an idiom for hobby, or like she was Man Ray's hobby, maybe, I don't know. But it's certainly an appreciation for the female form, albeit an objectified one, because the woman's face is not even very discernible, and her curves are. And then you have the armless reference is a reference to Venus statuary. So it looks back to art history. So here is a photograph of the New York School artists, which I'm going to talk about a great deal, and I have off and on throughout the semester. They are sometimes called the abstract expressionist. A lot of you have probably never even realized that there was a woman in there. And in fact, Lee Krasner should be part of this group as well. And here we have Barnett Newman, Jackson Pollock, Hedda Stern, a number of artists. And the abstract expressionists were very much about abstraction, about the individual, about the gesture of art and the movement of art. And so you'll see what I mean. So I put in boldface, the artist that I will be talking about in this particular um, lecture or this particular semester, really. And so again, I won't go into all of them. It would take days. So Hedda Stern, one of the irascibles in New York, and she is an artist that was also protesting not being included in the more traditional art exhibitions, but yet they didn't really fit in the traditional art exhibitions. So she actually comes from Europe, and then she goes to Manhattan, New York, which is that's kind of the heart of the New York School abstract expressionism, and it's also one of those movements that's essentially purely American. It's not really influenced by what was going on in Europe. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the abstract expressionist artists command huge prices in the marketplace. So she lived a long life. She lived past 100, and her ideas and her style was constantly changing. This particular work, called Vertical Horizontal, 1963, has some remnants that remind me a little bit of Rothko, but it's again also her own voice as well. Now, she was working in a large format like a lot of the abstract expressionists were. So this is Alaska 1, 1950s. Again, very gestural, very strong, bold markings. Helen Frankenthaler was about staining techniques, about the movement of the paint, the rubbing of the paint, non-representational art, abstract certainly, conceptual, these are all words associated with this movement, and color field painting, especially when we're talking about Rothko. But Hedda Stern's work that I just showed you also had a bit of the color field aspect to it as well. Align, colors, shapes, spaces all do one thing for and within themselves, and yet do something else in relation to everything that is going on within the four sides of the canvas. A line is a line, but it is a color. And this is from Helen Frankenthaler. And I generally include little clips in the modules to help you understand the artist more, maybe hear their voice. This is one of her notable works, or key works, if you want to call it that. And she was experimenting with synthetic polymers, which became acrylic. Early words were magna. So this was called Flood. And again, it's one of the works that tends to show up in art textbooks. She switched from oils to acrylic polymers. One of the benefits of acrylic, and one of the reasons I like to use it, is it doesn't have a strong scent. I'm asthmatic, so I don't really like things that have extremely strong scents. And so acrylic is pretty nice. And then today there's a kind of a push to use it a little bit because it's better for the environment. Oils are a little harder. But she was an artist that studied with Rufino Tomeo. He was also a very bold abstract artist. He used a lot of browns. And she experimented with color field painting and, again, pour techniques and staining techniques. And her works tended to be large format as well. That's one of the features of abstract expressionism, is this large format. She was married to Robert Motherwell for a number of years, and they ultimately divorced. And so various slashing, dripping techniques, especially when we get to Jackson Pollock. And it's about the process, it's about the gesture, it's about staining and rubbing, new materials, new tools, new ideas. And so here you can see the scale because there's a picture of the very lovely Helen Frankenthaler. Again, she also lived to be a much older lady. And people either tend to love it or hate it. I have to say it really grows on you. I've studied art for a number of years, so I have an appreciation for the abstract expressionism. Sometimes her works are soaked, so it has this depth to it. Now, if you or I start doing this in the driveway and making masterpieces, it's not nearly as pivotal because we are past that moment. But for its time, this was different. This was unusual. This was unique. And certainly something else will become that for this generation. And hard to know what it will be. If any artist can give us aid and comfort, he wrote, Helen Frankenthaler can, with her great splashes of soft color on huge square canvases. They're big but not bold. Some of them I think are pretty bold. Abstract but not empty or clinical. Free but orderly. Lively but intensely relaxed and peaceful. They are vaguely feminine. I'm not sure I like that. In the way water is feminine. Dissolving and instinctive and on an enveloping scale. I will say that when I go to like an art show or an exhibition or even a bunch of artists setting up like a swap meet, you do tend to walk by the works and go, oh, that's a male artist, clearly, or that's a female artist, clearly. But we really need to stop that because we're often wrong. And especially today where there is a strong sense of gender and gender expectations, we really just want it to be an artist, not a woman artist, not a male artist, not a Japanese artist, just an artist. So, Mountains in the Sea, this is another one of her notable works. It has some pencil in there. I think it also has a little bit of charcoal. And again, she uses these staining techniques. And she went with the works. If there was a spill, if there was something that ended up, you know, uh, in another spot that maybe it wasn't where she anticipated, she generally went with it. So, Robert Motherwell is who she married, and I think they had a successful marriage for a time. And I think having two artists in a family might be a little challenging at times. But in any case, they spent months touring Europe, then living high in the hog and mixing with this group that was very pivotal in art history. So this is Bilbao. Bilbao is a town in Spain. So large format artist again, bright, vivid colors here, which I think would probably mirror some of uh, the vividness of Bilbao. Some photographs. This is Helen Frankenthaler and Robert Motherwell. And here we have an example of Robert Motherwell's work. Robert Motherwell, one of the youngest of the abstract expressionists. I don't think he's as well known as some of the others. If there's one artist that sometimes bewilders me, it's probably Robert Motherwell. I hate to admit that, but it's true. And He did these elegy to the Spanish Republic because he felt that mankind had kind of hit a wall. Mankind had stopped improving, that this need for war was concerning. And so he produced these works over and over and over. He became preoccupied with it. I suppose I should answer that. I'm sorry. This is in my studio slash office. Most of the time I move the phone to the other room, but oh well, stuff happens. So this is actually one of around 150 images on the same subject. Now, artists get preoccupied with things. Keep in mind someone like Claude Monet and his haystacks, or poplars, or Rouen Cathedral. He would just paint those in different times of day, different lights, over and over and over. And again, it's not uncommon. I know in my situation, I went through a phase where I was painting chairs. I had a Picasso chair, I had a Modigliani table, I had um, a Warhol chair. In any case, I was preoccupied with chairs to the point that when we would walk by some sort of a vintage store or something and I'd see an interesting chair, my family would pull me along. So yeah, they artists do get preoccupied with stuff. And so some sources say 140. I'm not sure what the difference is. It just depends on the scholar and who's doing it, whether or not that's considered a true Motherwell. But this is why you should always use several sources in your research. Uh, these works tend to be very, very large. This one's a tiny bit blurry, and I apologize for that. And this is number 108, Elegy to the Spanish Republic. And so this is at the MoMA. Again, it's huge. Has a little bit of color in it, so it's a little different. Elegy Study 1, Elegy Fragment 2. And so he often used a reductive palette of black and white. Understatement. Lots and lots and lots of black and white. I would call that a limited palette. So a limited palette is Oftentimes, certain artists work in certain colors. They kind of develop their own voice, their own style. Motherwell influenced Rauschenberg, Robert Rauschenberg, and also Cy Twombly at Black Mountain College. Black Mountain College was kind of an important college for turning out some pretty innovative ideas. Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock. Almost all of you have probably heard of Jackson Pollock. Not all of you have heard of Lee Krasner. We are trying in art history to recognize more women artists. We certainly have not in the past, but that's changing, and we're trying to balance those numbers. And certainly, male artists have been predominant, particularly white male artists, and they're trying to have more diversity, especially in these art history survey books. Even so, some of the key artists are very much part of the history of art. Matisse, Picasso, but we're trying to be more inclusive and bring in some of those notable artists that maybe should have more recognition. And so I have talked about Lee Krasner as well. So Mrs. Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner. Again, she's been undervalued. A few female role models at the time, little encouragement from family. She was the one that tried to keep Jackson Pollock sober. Good luck with that. He did have periods of sobriety, but they didn't always last long. She was the one that kind of encouraged them to go to the East Hamptons, where he's working in a large barn, and consequently he can move to the large format without taking a hatchet to a wall. They quarreled viciously, but again, it was maybe the norm for the abstract expressionists, the New York school. They were hard drinking, they were volatile, they were emotional, they were very driven. And in the corner, there's a picture of Willem de Kooning and his wife, Elaine de Kooning. Elaine de Kooning was also an artist, but a more academic, more traditional artist, if you will. So this is mural, again, very large scale, and this is one of the early works where they were living in a New York apartment, and in order to paint the work, he actually took out a wall. So again, it's kind of an iconic story. It's a story that's been told and retold. And at the same time, this was a work that was presented for Peggy Guggenheim, of which he had a relationship with her, and she was also his patron. And at one of her cocktail parties, he proceeded to pee in the fireplace. So he wasn't always well behaved. Understatement. So this is Mural, 1943. And again, there's a lot of movement to it. It's a polychromatic, it's lots of color. Again, lots of movement. There's seemingly a pattern to it. And this is Mural 1943. It's really one of his first very, very expressive, bold, large-scale works. Virtually every time I go into a model home, I see the influence of abstract expressionism. These abstractions are very popular in home decor today, and you see it a lot, a lot. I mean, if next time you're watching a Wayfair commercial, look for the abstract art, because you'll often see it. He was called Jack the Dripper. He was, again, volatile, difficult, artistic persona dressed all in black. And that artistic persona is, I don't know, it's definitely a stereotype. There's plenty of artists that are more often in bright colors, but again, he was generally in black. So he died at 44 years old, drunk driving. They left a bar, and it was a fatality. He was driving an Oldsmobile. He was with two different women, and one of the women died. One of the women was his mistress. Lee Krasner and him were having great difficulties at this time. There is a movie called Pollock that's, again, pretty good as far as an overview of his life. It's not a documentary, so it's not entirely perfect as far as the dialogue. They've filled in a bit. The youngest of five, brawlers, difficult, he was expelled from school twice. Not one to conform. He was a Works Progress Administration artist, interest in the unconscious and interest in psychology. He really admired the Mexican muralist, maybe where the large scale idea came into, and he loved jazz music. Jazz music would have been playing in the background here. So a lot of these works are very large scale, especially the ones that are on the East Coast. There are a few of the larger works on the West Coast, but not many. And so call him an action painter. He was called Jack the Dripper. He was wrote up in Life magazine. Gestural, active art with lots of movement to it. And so these works are deeply admired by some people and deeply hated by some people. My painting does not come from the easel. I prefer to tack the unstretched canvas to the hard wall or the floor. I need the resistance of a hard surface, this is in his words. On the floor, I'm more at ease. I feel nearer, more part of the painting, since this way I can walk around it, work from the four sides, and literally be in the painting. So this is an early drip painting, Full Fathom 5, one of his notable works. A lot of his works were numbered. This is number 31, slightly blurry, but it shows you the scale of it. And so this is New York School Abstract Drip Painting. So this title actually comes from a Shakespeare, uh, it's a Shakespeare allusion, and it's from The Tempest by William Shakespeare, when Ariel describes a death by shipwreck. Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. These are pearls that were his eyes. Jackson Pollock. So it includes nails sometimes, tacks, buttons, keys, coins, anything that could possibly fall out of his pocket, little bits of cigarette, ash. There might be a fingerprint. Some of his works have been certified that way, even DNA certified. And so this is at the MoMA. Again, most of his works are like number one, or whatever. So after struggling with alcoholism on August 11th, 1956 is when he died in the evening of a single car crash in an Oldsmobile convertible. And so Lee Krasner is one of the people that really kept his estate and his memory alive, despite the fact that he had an extraordinarily difficult relationship. His mistress, Ruth Kligman, had survived, but one other woman did not. And so, and that's interestingly enough, it is one of the things that are generally not covered in biographies. They all say that he died in a drunken car accident, but not mention that there was another victim. I think that's strange. But yes, it does happen. So Lee Krasner, again, she's been very much undervalued. And part of that's the big personality of Jackson Pollock. She was very much part of this movement and modernism as well. And she decided early she was going to be an artist. She was educated in the arts, Cooper Union of Advancement of Art and Science, a National Academy of Design. She was considered rather incorrigible. And that fit in well with him as well. She worked menial jobs, did art at night. Determined lady. And she was also went to the Hans Hofmann School of Art, which was a turning point for her. It's said that she was influenced by Pablo Picasso, and she was also a works progress administration artist, which was, again, this was funding through the government that basically gave some artists an income. So composition, oil on linen, 1940s. So the deal was that while Krasner and Pollock both painted and encouraged each other, studio invitation only, he was the one with the more national reputation, Life magazine, etc. And she was one who very much promoted him before herself. He was the one who broke barriers and influenced everyone, including me, she said. But I think this looks very Picasso-esque myself. Messenger, 1959. So I think this work is interesting because often in Krasner's work, look for the eyes. You see markings that look kind of like eyes. At least I've seen that over and over again. So this is called Messenger. So here is a photograph from Look magazine. It was an article that got basically shelved. And so this is uh, a photograph. Tony Vaccaro was on assignment and he got these of um, Krasner and Jackson Pollock and also Willem de Kooning. And so these were basically put away for years and years, and then later they found them. So Willem de Kooning was also associated with these abstract expressionists, and they were very a little bit competitive with each other. So Pollock, number 1, 1948. Again, some people love them, some people, it's not their thing. Number 27. Again, it's very consistent. It's very, sometimes the word they use for it is atmospheric. Mark Rothko, early work, 1942. Probably not something you would recognize right off as a Mark Rothko. It looks kind of symbolist. So this is what he became more known for, and this is a large format work, and this is at the MoMA. These color filled, these blurred rectangles. Here you can see the scale because this guard is over 6 feet tall. And when I was speaking with him at the MoMA a number of years ago, which is one of the reasons why the quality of that picture is not terrific, is that this room was in a room that had Picasso's and Matisse. There was an Oldenburg, there was a Warhol, and I think there was a Matisse. In any case, there's typically one room of a museum that is maybe more valuable than other rooms. And it often has more guards and it probably has higher security. And it's because some of these works that are housed there are worth millions. And it's very rarely on the bottom floor. It's usually on the second or third floor because they don't want it to be easily accessible. More often than not, the third. I think this was on the third floor at the time. And I asked him, I go, okay, there's some really famous images in here. So which is the one where everyone gravitates to? Which is the most popular one? And I just started talking with him. I probably have the gift of gab. I like to talk, hence my job. So in any case, he said it was this work, this huge work by Rothko. He says he sees kindergartners sit down and look at it, college students. You see students sitting there writing essays in front of it. It's very individual. There are no wrong answers. How does this make you feel? Now, Dory Ashton, who was she was a biographer for Rothko. She said that he said it was tragic. It was this sad work. I see yellow and orange, and I think it's happy and bright, and that's not a wrong answer here. Oftentimes with Rothko, there is a sense of this large color field that encompasses the viewer and lets the viewer feel what the viewer wants to feel. So he meticulously removed brushwork, did not want a subject matter, gives it a number 5 or number 22. Paintings larger as time went by. A large picture is an immediate transaction. It takes you, the viewer, into it. Gottlieb and Rothko wrote that they favored the simple expression of complex thought. So rejection of traditional academic art, post-war reaction, which is what they often say about the abstract expressionism. It was a post-war reaction. They rejected the academic, they rejected the traditional, they wanted it about the individual and about individual expression. Mark Rothko, number 5, and Orange and Yellow, 1950s. Sometimes he would name it by the colors as well. So luminosity is something that his works are often labeled with, as well as, again, color-filled painting. That's definitely associated with Rothko. When I saw this, I thought it was interesting. This is before the color-filled works were out. And it almost looks like how I imagine a Rothko exhibition to look like. These little cell areas where there's paintings laid out. It's not, it's Subway. But it's interesting for that. So I just thought it was an intriguing work, and it's also untitled. And here you can see it juxtaposed against what his work would evolve into. Barnett Newman, known for his zips. So um, he also goes into minimalism, also labeled conceptual art. So born and raised in New York, a son of Polish Jewish immigrants, his approach to art making was shaped by his philosophy at City College in New York. He was also very, very politically active. And so these sort of works are something that you often see in like a model home. I think it looks pretty cool right here. So here we have Stations of the Cross. Again, very abstract. These were produced between 1958 and 1966, and it's certainly an ironic title. So it's this contemplation of the last hours of Jesus's life. Usually they're done in wood, maybe they're done in paint, maybe they're done in bronze, and it's generally displayed on a church wall. It's very sacred for some Catholics. So his work is often oversized, Barnett Newman, and he was very philosophical in his approach, finding visual equivalents for mystical concern. So at the New York Plaza Hotel, Newman spotted a priest and said, "Have you seen my Stations of the Cross paintings? I showed them at the Vatican, and the Pope said I brought Christianity into the 20th century." Leo Krasner then snapped, "For Christ's sakes, Barney, isn't that a little pretentious?" I kind of think so. Okay. Now remember, these are called zips. That's the term associated with Barnett Newman. Why so big? Scale equals feeling, he said. To him, the void only by a stripe was sublime. Sublime is something unbelievably beautiful, full of light, meaning, and the chaos of ecstasy. The orange one is Day One, and then the second one is Voice of Fire, 1967. So known for these monochromatic fields of color with a contrasting stripe. Over and over and over again, he was preoccupied with it. One of the ways to kind of see an overview of the artist really quick is to Google their name and click on images. And you'll see what is the most searched images, what is kind of, it's almost like going to a little mini art exhibition, if you will. And so it can be very helpful when you're studying. So Barnett Newman, Canto 8 from 18 Cantos, 1963. You are not responsible for that title. Might you be responsible for knowing that Barnett Newman is known for his zips and being able to recognize his very distinctive style? Yes. So he gave up texture, brushwork, drawing, shading, perspective for flat fields of pure color sliced by one or two off-center stripes or zips. He was reliant on the evocative quality of color. Donald Judd. Donald Judd. He said, "It isn't necessary for a work to have a lot of things to look at, to compare, to analyze one by one, to contemplate." And he wrote this in Specific Objects. It was an essay in the 1960s. So he's associated with minimalism. Minimalism, this particular artist, repetition of form, exactness. Exactitude is something that's very much part of his works. The thing as a whole, its quality as a whole, is what is interesting. This is according to Tate.org, which is a pretty good source. It's a source I use a lot. I like Tate Museum. In fact, I named a dog after Tate Museum. And so this is called Untitled. Again, it's placed exactly, carefully. You're not going to find a Donald Judd haphazardly placed on the wall. if you do, it's a really bad curator. Works are generally untitled. Again, it was active from the 60s to the 90s, associated with minimalism. Might we have minimalism today? Yes, there's kind of a movement for more spare um, interiors, and we would call it neo-minimalism or post-minimalism. These are all untitled. This is kind of what he's known for. And these are known as stacks. So a lot of his works were vertical and some of them were horizontal. I see more verticals than I do horizontals. But even so, at the end of the gallery, if you see a bunch of Donald Judds, you can probably guess, oh, those are Donald Judds. So very careful details, very exact, very recognizable as far as that goes as well. And so again, very carefully organized. And he would make it very clear how they were to be placed in the gallery. So the artist's intentions are something that are generally important. Strong verticals, horizontals, industrial materials, lots of steel, a distinctive signature autograph works. And this is vertical, of course. Then here we have another example of untitled, I'm sure. And then some of his works, like this image, again, very distinctive, very angular. This is polychromatic, which is a little unusual for Donald Judd, but it does happen. Material, space, and color are the main aspects of visual art. Everyone knows that there is material that can be picked up and sold, but no one sees space and color. Two of the main aspects of art are invisible. The basic nature of art is invisible. Not entirely sure I agree with that, but it's interesting. Minimal art, again, emerged in the 50s, really took off in the 60s and 70s. And it was a reaction to the individualism of the abstract expressionist. So here you don't want necessarily a composition or a theme. And again, this is untitled. I think you can guess the artist. Eva Hesse, another example of minimalism. She's also been associated with modernism. Sometimes other words for minimalism is cool art, object art, primary structure art. Donald Judd, Ellsworth Kelly, Dan Flavin, these are minimalist. And again, some of this style is still around, but we would call it post-minimalism or neo-minimalism. Ellsworth Kelly, known for bold contemporary canvases. His works are again very distinctive and recognizable. Some might even call them simple, yet there's something very compelling about his work. The Los Angeles County Art Museum had an exhibition on Ellsworth Kelly, and I was happened to be there, and I was like, okay, I'll go in. And I walk in, and one of the things that's important when you go to an exhibition, especially it's on one artist, you get to see all their work at once, and then it gives you a little different idea about their voice and the way they experience art. But it was interesting because I happen to follow in a group of, I would guess they were kindergarten or first grade. They were enamored. They just thought it was the best. They were definitely more responsive to the art in the Ellsworth Kelly galleries than they were in the other galleries. And so that's kind of cool, isn't it? That maybe it's not your thing, but it might be someone else's thing. And maybe that's going to be an early experience for those children that they'll always remember. So there's a place for everyone in art. I really believe that. So again, very bold, contemporary, and again, many would be dismissive, but his works are pretty cool, I think. So Ellsworth Kelly, again, loves color. Color is very much part of Ellsworth Kelly. And here's a look into a gallery in the bottom corner as well. Gaza, you can probably make a little bit of a connection to Mark Rothko here, but it's harder edge. That's a term associated with minimalist artists like Ellsworth Kelly. hard edge painting. And so this is something that is often part of minimalism as well. So calculated, maybe even analytical in style, sharp, simple forms, unique contours, very precise. You don't have splashes all over it. Frank Stella said, "What you see is what you see," and it's been called subjective abstraction. I saw these at the Tampa Museum of Art, and I was really surprised these were Ellsworth Kelly. So he did produce some line drawings. This is a line drawing which kind of looks like a simple doodle. Sunflower 2, lemon citron, cyclamen. Again, looks like a simple line drawing. Doesn't look like there's a lot of time spent here necessarily. Magnolia, camellia. So um, it is said that his work really developed when he started looking at organic forms, looking at the basic forms of nature and environments. Architectural features are said to have influenced his lines and squares and arches. So he grew up in New Jersey. He was very interested in flowers, and again, these are fig leaf and lemon branch. So the plant drawings helped them. They were kind of a bridge to seeing the basis for the first abstract paintings. Okay, so these were his words. So artists or anyone who's drawn from observation will immediately get what he means. Others will get it after a while, according to this author. Orange Blue, 1957. Um, in the marketplace, he's doing just fine. So Ellsworth Kelly, 2.7 mil. I can think of other things I would buy for 2.7 mil, but it's still interesting. Again, looking in a gallery view, I think it's a one way of getting an idea about the artist as a whole. Now, oftentimes when you look at some of these colors, especially this red, the colors almost seem to vibrate when you're looking at them in a gallery situation. Green angle, this is at the Broad. So um, it's huge, and this apparently had some difficulty getting into the Broad. One of the guards said they were breaking down walls and doors to get it in because it's really, really big. So, but this also has that kind of vibrant quality. Almost, I don't want to say it hurts your eyes, but it affects your eyes. So green angle, it's timeless, multicultural, very open-ended. So he died at 92 of natural causes in 2015. He was encouraged as a teacher. His parents weren't delighted with the whole artist thing, and that's not uncommon. Um, and most parents want to make sure their kids have a good way of taking care of themselves, and there is the idea that most artists are poor, which does happen. But parents would only agree to technical school. So Pratt Institute in Brooklyn is where he went. He attended for 2 years and then served in the Army. He used the GI Bill to study at Boston School of the Museum of Fine Arts, and then he also studied in Paris. Um, Artistic credentials certainly helped with his success because he could articulate about his art and talk about what drew him, what excited him. And so I think education is often a part of an artist's success. This is Ellsworth Kelly. He was part of the classified Ghost Army of World War II. This is kind of a fun fact. His earliest works were created for the U.S. Special Service. They did special camouflage work where they produced rubber and wood constructions to look like fake tanks and trucks, so that from an aerial view, um, it would be thought that there were more Allied troops on the ground than there were. So I thought that was interesting. Again, he had an early success. His early success was influenced by, he said, Picasso and Matisse. I see more Matisse myself because of his love of color. Asian art and Romanesque churches were also something that said to have influenced him. He came back to the United States and had his first solo show in 1956. He was part of an exhibition of 16 Americans, and these were geometric abstract works. Can you imagine in the 1950s this would have looked pretty strange? I mean, honestly, it's still strange for a lot of people, but in any case, this was labeled hard edge painting. And so his works are joyful, precise color fields. And his last work was more of an architecture. This is a quote from Wilson, who wrote about him. And then here we have some stamps from February 2019, 4 years after his death. Uh, White artworks, I think, are incomprehensible to a lot of people. And scholar Brandon Joseph said, the wall is part of the painting, it always has been. But again, do I think this confuses people? Absolutely. There are a lot of artists that work on white paintings, and you do see people scratching their head in front of them. Uh, do I think they're as successful today? No, not really, because it's been done. But in any case, when we talk about a white cube environment, we're often talking about a gallery. Galleries are often bright white and cubed, and they're white so they can display the artworks in a neutral ground. And so that's sometimes called a traditional white cube environment. So this is Ellsworth Kelly at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Sculpture 2, Painted Aluminum. And it's fun to kind of listen to people as they walk into the museum seeing this, because it used to be by the doors, and people really were puzzled by these. Uh, and again, simple geometric shapes were part of his style. And so, in this time and place, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was pretty new and innovative. In one of the rooms, there was a large rectangular, semi, almost square um, sculpture that was about, I want to say 8, 10 inches high. And it was just a platform. It looked like a platform that something would be on. And leaning against the wall, there was a guard. And I was like, do you stand here all day just to make sure people don't sit on the artwork? Yes, I do. And and they try it all the time. So I had the sense the guard wasn't particularly excited about this particular artwork, which I thought was interesting. Ellsworth Kelly, this was one of his last works, 2015, blue, black, red. Again, distinctive, hard edge painting, color filled painting. He did a lot of color spectrum works, which I think are pretty visually appealing. The color spectrum is certainly something that is important in art. All color is important in art. You know, color fills, color spectrums. This is Spectrum 5, and it's very large, and it's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And again, once you've seen this a few times, you will definitely recognize his distinctive works. So this was actually produced by my mother, artist run in the family. I just thought it was amazing because I get this call. Remember that rainbow picture? No, we were in New York. There was the guy that did the rainbow stuff. And after a while, I was able to intuit what she was talking about. I looked it up. I sent it to a picture of it to her. She says, I want to do it. I was like, okay, why? Um, this particular hallway connected the garage and her studio to the rest of the house. And the windows looked out on kind of a forested area of Puget Sound. And producing these works was very, very difficult because she said it just took so much paint and you had to get it really, really, really even. I even loved the juxtaposition between the color spectrum and the Quaker pew chair that's right in front of it. That's a couple 100 years old. It's very old. And the juxtaposition of the contemporary with the traditional, I think, is pretty interesting. And I'm not the only one that thinks so because the windows looked out on the back of a cul-de-sac and people would actually see it kind of up the hill. And she actually had a few people come to the door and ask about it. In fact, the realtor, when she sold the house, wanted them. So, yeah, pretty interesting. But that is a way to have an appreciation for the artist, is to try to reproduce what the artist did. And actually signed on the wall is after Ellsworth Kelly, 1969, because you give credit where credit's due. So, Black over Yellow, 2015. So here again, uh, it's just very freeing to be able to produce something original, different, and yet he has a very consistent voice. And this is actually pretty large too, at 90 by 70 inches. Sol LeWitt. Sol LeWitt, wall drawing, 2003. He's doing very similar things in a way to Ellsworth Kelly, although his is a lot more complicated. Ellsworth Kelly are more simplified forms. But he liked the ephemeral or temporary quality of non-representational or conceptual art. He considered himself a conceptual artist, not a minimalist. So he gave himself his own label. So he was a conceptual artist. And these works, once they were gone, they were gone. They're documented in photography, in books. And he does these large scale works in museums. He's no longer with us. And there's some interviews online, and there's some, I think I can think of a clip of his son talking about his artwork as well. Sol LeWitt, Whirls and Twirls, last commission was revealed 2009 after his death. His daughter kind of helped with the application of his last work, and 250 porcelain tiles were installed in a subway. He did not drive, he always took the subway, and so um, this is a monument that was able to stay, which is nice. Wall drawing and wall drawing 397, wall drawing 370, 10 geometric figures, so Sol LeWitt, conceptual art. He argued that ideas for works of art actually are art. I can get behind that. So in his 5-decade career, he insisted ideas were the backbone of his efficiency and artistic clarity. So these definitely have a quality of vibration when you look at them. It also can be connected to op art, specifically Bridget Riley's op art, black and white art. Detailed plans, 5 people drew it on a wall over 4 weeks at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this was done with painter's tape, then they put white primer over it, and then they rubbed over it with India ink. And then they removed the tape after it dried, and then you had this, which I think is kind of cool and interesting looking. Here you can see it a little bit larger, see some of the details. Um, when you remove tape, some of the color bleeds underneath it, so that's why you get a little bit of that unevenness. Wall drawing 373, A, B, C, D, E, F, each of those forms being a section. White crayon on black wall. If you look closely, there's a little bit of that texture of that waxy white crayon. Sol LeWitt, wall drawing, 620, 1989, Spain. The form was derived from a cubic rectangle with color ink washes superimposed. This is from Public Delivery, which is a contemporary art site and a good resource. Pretty reliable. Sol LeWitt, sculpture. He also did sculptural forms. This one is called 5-Unit Cross, 1971. Sol LeWitt, and then you can also see Sol LeWitt working. I think you could see the connection between Sol LeWitt, conceptual artist, and Donald Judd, minimalist artist. And certainly a minimalism is a little more simplified. Christo, wrapped chair. He liked to wrap things, all kinds of things. His wife, Jean-Claude, and Christo collaborated on many environmental, temporal, ephemeral works, and she passed away in 2009. His production declined dramatically after she passed away, and he passed away not much longer after. And so here we have wrapped chair. Portrait of Ray Lakma, certainly ironic. And you wonder, is there really a portrait of Ray under it? And so certainly having an understanding of who Christo is helpful when viewing something like this. Definitely original, definitely kind of complicated. And so his large-scale projects are funded privately, and he uses sales from preparatory sketches and sales from works of art and books to fund some of their projects. Their projects tend to be very, very large scale. Again, lots of wrapping. Over the River was a project that was finally tossed because he, again, his production slowed dramatically after his wife passed away. And so the Arkansas River was something they began together, but it wasn't completed. And it had a lot of paperwork problems getting it through different bureaucracies, which has always been a challenge. Wrapped Trees, 1997, Switzerland. So they also did the umbrellas. It's one of the more famous works. And this is in Japan. And then the yellow ones were done in the yellow umbrellas were done in the Grapevine area. So these are short term and they're produced. So temporal art, this is the example from California, the Grapevine. And remember the counterpart was in Japan. So Christo and Jean-Claude, 1,880 workers to open the 3,100 umbrellas in Ibaraki in California. Again, to kind of show different cultures and reflections and the use of land. It had a lot of ideas where they're very conceptual. There was a fatality, I think it was in California, and that resulted in them shutting it down. So I guess a woman was under it, and I guess wind loosened it, and I guess it hit her and she died. So pretty sad. So again, this is the Japanese view, and this is north of Tokyo. And so again, this was government agencies, private owners, lots of people involved. And they're adamant that this is always done with private funds, not public funds. They also did the gates in New York, in Central Park. That was also pretty famous. One of the more confusing works of art is this. And this, remember the banana taped to a wall? That was Maurizio Cattelan, comedian. And it was literally taped to the wall. Two editions were sold for 120,000, and then another sold for 150. So when you think you've heard it all, so yeah, I'll probably have a clip on this one as well. So thank you. And again, this is only an hour lecture, and so there's generally going to be little videos and clips to supplement this as well. So thank you.